board. But tonight we have here Pamela Patterson, who is highly certified in multiple ways, whether it's the CBAP or the PMP. Um, she has a great listing of different books and topics that she has put together. And actually, right now, we are talking about collaboration is a lie without trust. And I saw the title and I thought, I do sometimes feel like I'm just staring at a wall when I join a meeting to collaborate with other people. And I mean, it may not be a real wall, but it is a digital wall. Um, and so the topic that she's going to present here, which is how to actually connect with stakeholders, would be a huge help with some of that because connecting is seems to be more difficult these days than when we were in the past with, in-person meetings. So with that, Pamela, would you like to take over?
Thank you so much, Travis, and I will begin sharing my screen. Okay,
Yeah.
so you should be able to see my screen, correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So collaboration is a lie without trust, how to actually connect with stakeholders. I am hoping that this is going to be a very interactive session because it's as much about me giving information in my experience as it is about sharing your own experiences so we can understand and learn from each other. So, in my view, I actually can't see the participants, and I can't see the chat. So, I'm wondering if somebody would be able to volunteer to help me out to let me know when there is somebody in the chat or somebody who'd like to has their hands up or whatever.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, was that Steve?
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much,
Mhm.
Steve. And yes, normally I am beaming in from east of Toronto, but I had the good fortune of doing a workshop here in Seattle about interviewing stakeholders. So I did that all day today in this beautiful city. And then tomorrow I'm heading off to Portland to see a cousin. So it's been just a really, really nice part of the world here on the West Coast, and it's been wonderful. So thank you for having me. A little bit about me. I write books. I've been a BA for quite some time, 20 years or so, and I'm also a project manager and I focus on IT. That's kind of where my space is. So, who has been in a collaborative, and I'm using quotes, a collaborative meeting where nobody said what they were really thinking? Who's been in a meeting like that?
So
Yes.
if I'm in the meeting, I'm the one talking.
Okay.
Usually I always have something to say. But I understand what you're saying is that there's a lot of people that just are silent. We had a meeting today where somebody had to call out somebody, hey, I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you give us your thoughts?
Okay. Okay. And who else?
I think sometimes it depends on the sensitivity of the topic and the dynamics of the meeting. Sometimes people don't want to speak up because they're afraid of maybe a little career limiting move kind of thing. Or if the boss had one position and they think they have another position, they may not readily speak up. So it's always a challenge to try and get people to say what's on their mind.
To feel safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
who else?
Also, uncertainty. I've run across that a lot. People are a little uncertain if an answer is correct or not. So if they would rather be silent than potentially be wrong. And most of the time, they should have said something.
Be wrong in front of everybody. So that's a very difficult position to be in.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And
And who
sometimes
else?
people just don't want to volunteer
or to be the first or among those to put a position forward. They want to wait and see what everyone else thinks. They don't want to be the outlier potentially. So they'll wait and see what everyone else says rather than volunteer their own thoughts.
I think that's a very poignant point because it's not about not wanting to share, it's about being the first one because you don't know the tone and maybe the culture of the room and reading the room and how that's going to go. And then people remember that, oh, you said that first. You said it, right? Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I think my fear of follow-up questions to anything that I bring up that I might not be prepared for, I would avoid that.
Yeah. Yeah, because you don't know what might come, right? And you're put in that very difficult position.
That's the introvert in me.
I was
And me as
in
well.
I was
Hmm.
in a scenario in a meeting where my boss's boss was we got everybody in the room and he's an interesting character, let's put it that way. But we are coming up with a big turnover and he started out by saying, "We're all ready for this turnover, right?" And at that point, no one's going to say, "No, I don't think we are." So, but I spoke up because I had the batch side of things and, someone had the online part. And usually we rely on them to get our feeds so that we could test the changes we're making. And I could tell that they were behind because we are like a week away and we had no feeds to test with yet. So, I mentioned it and, I said, this is what I'm seeing. I don't know if anybody else will say anything, but this is the way it looks. So the online person who's leading the online team said nothing. After the meeting, we go out into our aisles and, the person, her name was Lara, said, I totally agree with Bob. There's no way we're going to be ready. Blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, she said nothing during the meeting.
So there's a couple of points of deception here. And when we get to the part about the types of deception, Bob, you're going to recognize where your story shows up very clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and she's promoted to manager like 2 months later too, by the way. So, sometimes it's a game you play. They do shoot the messenger.
Corporate survival.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? And again, my apologies. I can't see the hands. So jump right in. Okay. So I did a little bit of research. And as it turns out, according to Harvard Business Review, 81% of people lie at work. And people lie an average of 1 to 2 lies a day, depending on who they are and where they are and that kind of thing. But does that surprise you that 81% of people have lied at work?
Not at all. See it all the time. They'll say they got something done and they haven't done it.
And the other 19% are lying too.
The other 19% are lying too. Yeah. Yeah, people lie a lot. And of course, people lie for different reasons, to avoid negative consequences, to appear more competent, to avoid conflict. Okay, we've kind of heard that already tonight. People tend to lie more in impersonal situations like email or chat, but where there is reduced social accountability. So people won't see you as much, and we can kind of get away with it more, which is a problem as well because we do a lot of kind of visual, impersonal communication. So that's an issue. Um, Lots of lying at work. And what kind of lies? There's so many different kinds of lies. And I was surprised myself to see how many different lies there are in terms of types, but also just that I knew every single one of them because I had experienced it at work. So, number one is lying by commission. And this is a bald-faced lie. So saying something you know is false. Like, we're on track, boss, when you know that we're not. Lying by omission. I'm sure that we have experienced this. So leaving out critical information. In terms of being a BA, it would be documenting a requirement, but not mentioning that there's a dependency risk related to that requirement. So we are lying by omission. There's also minimization, so downplaying, reducing severity or urgency. So calling a blocker a minor issue when we know that it really isn't. Or the opposite, exaggeration. So amplifying the truth. Everybody loves the prototype when two stakeholders gave mild feedback about it. Okay. There's lying by deflection, which is answering around the real issue. So changing the topic when asked about those timelines, hoping people don't notice. Lying by deflection. And as well, there is the lie of silence. And we heard this already as an example. So letting others assume something false, allowing a sponsor to believe that the scope is smaller than it is, or we are ready. Just allowing somebody else to believe that. And then there's the lying by compliance. And we saw this already tonight. So agreeing publicly and then disagreeing privately in the hallway, nodding in meetings, and then directing the team differently later. Okay, so lying by compliance. And lying by over politeness, saying, oh, that's an interesting idea. And the translation of that is it's going to crash the system. But we're going to be overly polite. And as well, lying by self-deception, lying to myself, convincing myself that withholding information is for their own good, so they won't panic. Okay. And the last one is lying by proxy. So letting someone else deliver misleading information while you stay silent. And an example might be another manager saying, this won't affect timelines, and you say nothing. Lying by proxy. So you can lie, we can lie, and not have a bad intention. It could be to protect ourselves or somebody else, avoid discomfort. But still, collaboration fails with people with deception. So, who has felt the impacts of one of these methods of deception?
mean just today or overall?
Today is good, but overall, something that sticks out.
No, I think uh, minimization certainly seems to be one that does plague organizations and kind of connects with that perspective of we know of scope creep, but there's also hope creep.
Oh,
Oh, we're
great.
behind, but we're gonna catch up. We're gonna catch up. We're gonna catch up. Like, how is it that we're gonna catch up, right? There might be opportunities to catch up, but if you're in a position where you have to rebaseline or you have to abandon the project or you have to determine, hey, look, we got to split this into a couple different phases, that's a challenge that folks tend to minimize.
And it's common.
Yeah. I was thinking about something that somebody was saying, could have been today, or just it says it's been said a lot. Automation. We should automate it, and I think it's a bit of minimization and exaggeration, because when somebody uses that term, they just say it, but they don't really know how much work it takes to actually automate something. And sometimes you can't automate it, even though you say you let's automate it. And so I think for me, that's a big gotcha. Whenever I hear the word automation, luckily, I'm not in the office anymore because I'd probably roll my eyes.
Yeah, it's okay to roll eyes when the video's off, right?
Yeah, exactly.
How we cope. Yeah.
I would also wonder if there's a degree to some of these, like silence or over politeness. You have them flagged as deception, and they are to a degree, but also wonder how much are they survival strategies. You know, as someone who's literally had, a manager on a call blow up, in a follow-up call, is like, why'd you say that? You should never say that. People will, mistake that we're not competent or something like that when you say something that's true. You quickly learn, okay, just don't bring certain things up, because otherwise your career is, at severe risk, because some people simply don't want to hear the bad news. So, raising the risk is, as you said, often they shoot the messenger, unfortunately, especially in IT projects, at least in my experience. So,
Yeah. Yeah, survival skills. I think that's a really important part. So there was no bad intention, but the intention is really just to survive a very toxic culture, right?
I think all of these apply when somebody doesn't clearly understand their role. It could come across as it could just come across in so many different ways. And defining roles and responsibilities sometimes is a really big deal when they're not, it's not clear across the board.
Hmm. Yeah, because if it's muddy, then who is responsible for what and bringing what to whose attention? There's no racy, there's no understanding about who should be saying something and not being silent. Yeah. So this is not about the one-offs, right? Because 81% of us apparently lie. And we've all had bad days. We've all cut corners sometimes. Officer, my speedometer broke a few minutes ago. But it really is about a pattern. And if we are seeing a pattern in somebody else of deception that seems to have a negative or a self-serving intention, then that's something to watch out for. And we can't do anything about them in particular. And again, there's corporate survival skills at play. Sometimes when you bring something to somebody else that is known deception, then we have a target on our back, right? So we can't do anything about them to an extent, but we can do something about us, and that changes them. When we change our position, when we have stronger footing, that changes them. And I'll tell you, just very recently, I was on a project, and there were a couple of project managers who reported to the senior project manager. And for whatever reason, I knew because I was told, for whatever reason, one of the project managers kept throwing me under the bus behind closed doors. And I, of course, didn't have proof myself because it was kind of hearsay, but I was hearing it from a reliable source and kept hearing the me being thrown under the bus and not to trust this particular project manager. Um, and so it was one of those situations where you couldn't even name it. You couldn't even put your finger on it because you were hearing information from somebody else. But certainly there were hints of the feelings towards me because just kind of cryptic comments here and there in a larger meeting. So it was very difficult because you just couldn't confront what you can't see. And what I kept doing, and it was a deliberate decision to do it, is I just kept doing my job. And I kept my head above the water. I helped other people. And I started to develop and have a brand around other people of a helper, of somebody who's reliable, of somebody who's going to help somebody else get something done. And that's what was noticed. So even though there was one person who was attempting to minimize and through deception and through some different kinds of tactics, I was building up my environment around me to support me and because I supported them. So that drowned out these other petty deceptions about me that I had heard were going on. Really important to know who your friends are and who you can collaborate with and who you can be honest with. But again, it's something that you see over time, and being aware of these other deceptions about maybe they are corporate survival tactics. Maybe there's another reason. Maybe there's a toxic culture. Maybe we've had a manager yell at us or something like that. Maybe it's been a career limiting move experience that we faced in the past. So, whatever it is, there are legitimate and understandable reasons for deception. And one of the things that we always want to keep in mind is about context. And context frames the communication. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So, when you frame the communication, in context, and IIBA gives us an entire list of what context could mean. It could mean attitudes, behaviors, beliefs, competitors, culture, demographics, and this list is going to keep scrolling here as I'm talking. And so when you frame the communication in a context and present context before content, you make people feel psychologically safer. And what does that mean? Context before content. It means that you're being transparent in your intent. You're explaining why you're asking a question before you ask it. And it removes the fear of manipulation. So we've all been asked a question by somebody we didn't trust and we were hesitant to answer, right? Because we don't have the context, we don't have the trust, we don't know what the intent is when we're just asked a question. But when we give the context, it changes the game because it changes the frame. So here's an example of it. If we are just asked, why are you documenting requirements this way? It sounds like a question we should be wary of. It sounds like a question that we need to start defending and we need to start thinking, where is this going? Why are they asking? What's going to happen to me? Okay. But if we are reframing it and we say it differently, we put a different front end onto this question, might say something like, as you know, we always seem to run out of time when we do requirements. So I've been asked to take a look at what our process is. And can you help me with that? Because your requirements have gone so well. Why are you documenting requirements this way? Okay. So it's the same question, but it's framed differently, which also gives it a different tone and it removes the fear. Has anybody tried this technique using a different front end to a question and thinking about the context that you are in, but also that this other person is in? If you want to share your experience.
I would say it's a common, well, at least common technique I've used, especially when I'm working with a new team, because a lot of times you're asking basic questions or what seem like basic questions. And it's like, hey, I'm new. I'm trying to learn your processes. Here's the overall challenge we're trying to meet, trying to set that context so that people are encouraged to provide information, as you said, knowing the context and are more willing to speak up. I found, if you set the context for why you're asking questions, you get a lot more answers, and your answers are a lot more valuable because people know the context in which you're asking it, and then they tailor their answers.
And there's trust and there's implied support as well. Yeah, because journalists, they tend not to use context, right? It's a rapid fire question after question after question. And you don't know where they're going, and you sometimes might think they have a nefarious intent or at least a different intent than what you would like. And it's very difficult to feel safe and guarded and protected in that kind of a situation where there's no context. So that's great to hear that this is something that you regularly use, is providing the context. So another technique that I use, and I've been using it a long time, is making deposits in the emotional bank account, in somebody else's emotional bank account. And I learned recently that Stephen Covey has been saying this for quite some time as well, but I really think that I said it before Stephen Covey. So Stephen, I don't know, you were watching one of my webinars at some point. So this is really important. Making deposits in somebody else's emotional bank account. It's helping them first, and that's going to build the trust and collaboration that we are looking for. And, I had a director at one time who was very, very difficult, and people refused to work for him because he was so difficult and the kind of person who is throwing things and the kind of person that people quit after 1 month. I mean, I was probably the fourth consultant that he had worked with within a matter of months. They kept quitting and, for personal reasons or whatever it was. And so, what I realized though in working with him is that he felt unsafe. He, for whatever reason, a toxic environment, maybe he really had a bad experience, but at the crux of it, he felt unsafe. And so he became very, very protective and a very, very difficult person to work with. And what I noticed over time is when I made those contributions and to his emotional bank account, when I made the contributions of publicly praising him, privately helping him, showing outward support for him, always being reliable and consistent in my support for him, that I did notice over time that I was able to make some withdrawals. And things like working at home or getting his support on a project or a direction, that support came automatically from him because I had already given it. Deposits can be clarity, listening, honesty, doing favors, going the extra mile, doing more research, any ways that you can support somebody else um, is a really, really positive thing to building that collaboration. And he who wishes to secure the good of others has already secured his own. Okay, so why does this matter to us? Our influence doesn't come from authority. And that's pretty typical for BAs. I was actually talking about this at the workshop today, is BAs tend not to have authority. We tend not to be the SVP or the president or the CEO. We are worker bees. And so our influence doesn't come from authority. It comes from service. It comes from human connection, from relationships. And stakeholders support people they trust, not processes that they're assigned to, right? So he who wishes to secure the good of others has already secured his own. And not in every case, as we've talked about, but really, really important to think about the trust ladder as well. So, has anybody heard of the trust ladder? Any
I
hand
haven't.
went up there?
No.
Okay. So the first step in the trust ladder is consistency. And this is behavioral. This is something that we can do. And this is in building the trust ladder, we are getting to true collaboration with our stakeholders. So this is our emotional tone. It's being reliable. It's having follow through that over time, it's a very consistent thing. And so, and that's your brand, right? Brand is what people say about you when you leave the room. And If they can see this consistency, they can experience the consistency, then you are already on your way to moving up the ladder, the trust ladder. And that goes to believability. So when somebody sees something over time, they see it consistently, and it's on in all the ways that we communicate and all the ways that we do our work. So if we are having a supportive tone in our voice all the time, well, now it leads to believability. Now it's felt. So it goes from behavioral, now it is felt. And stakeholders feel that you are truthful and not performing once they see that consistency. And then it's about credibility. Okay. And now that's earned. So credibility is earned. It's your judgment, not your documentation. It becomes the source of influence. And then trust is the next step in the ladder, and that's relational. So stakeholders can now take emotional risks. They can now say their thoughts in a meeting. They can now voice something that maybe they wouldn't have if they didn't have these other steps in the ladder. They can admit they're a little confused or something. They can reveal some risks. And telling the truth early, of course, helps a project because the cheapest time that a mistake is ever going to be is in the beginning rather than let it go throughout the project and show up in testing or in the product, right? So, and the last step in the ladder is collaboration, and that's an emergent quality. So once the trust is high, then collaboration becomes natural, not forced. So it's not about herding people into a room and saying, let's collaborate. We want high collaboration. So it's not about saying it, it's about building it. And when you have consistency, believability, which leads to credibility and trust, you naturally get that collaboration. So I like to know from you guys, what is the step in the ladder where you find the most struggle, either for yourself or for your team, your organization? Think of the stakeholder that you struggle with the most and which rung of the ladder is missing or compromised.
I think for me, it's been at times consistency because that stakeholder can come in from a bunch of different angles, a bunch of different perspectives, their requests, that is, their expectations. So when you think of how important it is to build that credibility, and I see credibility in the third one, the consistency kind of paves the road for that. And I think that sometimes it's not necessarily what have you done for me lately, but it's kind of like an annual review, right? They say, oh, well, here's the things you did well, and here's the things you didn't do well, and blah, 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 blah. So that's the first one that came to mind for me.
So it's consistency in the other person.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, it's hard to go up the ladder when you don't have the very first one, which is consistent.
Uh, you know, yes, it is in the other person. However, I can see how the other person might say consist lack of consistency in my response without necessarily kind of acknowledging or understanding that, hey, it's based, it's driven on what they themselves are doing or asking or saying.
Okay, so a perception of consistency from another person's perspective.
I'm kind of on that step too, and I'm just thinking of something a little bit different. I don't know if the right word is intent, but sometimes in order to get to trust, you need to understand where a person's coming from and what's their angle. Are they trying to use these steps to step over everybody to get to the top? Are they really looking to collaborate ultimately? You know, if you're trying to help somebody, do they take it like you're trying to do their job and make them look bad? So to me, in my situation, I think I run into some cases where I'm just not sure where that person's coming from. And, a lot of times it results in a whole slew of emails about back and forth about, what someone's trying to do.
Okay. So you mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned trust, but also maybe credibility and perspective. Because
Hmm.
when we're not sure about what that person is trying to do you mean from like their kind of disorganized thinking, or is it a communication issue, or
Hmm.
yeah. And having a lack of consistency in the communication is difficult as well. And sometimes it's just not intentional, but it is what it is. There is no consistency, so there's no believability and there's no credibility and trust, but not for bad intentions, right?
Yeah.
Also, say on the believability and credibility side, often it's kind of inherited, at least, in my last role as part of IT, and IT did not have a great reputation in serving, the rest of the business. Often it was they wanted shadow IT. IT was trying to lock stuff down. IT had some limited resources, so things took a while to get a response. Or we had a parent company that limited options and things like that. So often the business perception was, we've brought these problems to IT to get it solved, and you guys take forever or tell us you can't do it. You're not really a viable partner for us. You're more an impediment than someone we can believe will actually serve our needs. And often, as sort of the frontline BA trying to scope out the needs and try and figure out some of the options, you're on that front line. It's like, hey, I really have no control over whether this is going to get funded or what the proposed solution from the architecture team is going to be or any of that. All I can do is help you define the problem in such a way that IT can make it actionable. But yeah, there, you also have that inherited sort of believability and credibility of sort of the overall business situation again that you're working within. And and then just you as a BA coming in, hey, I don't know your business that well. They're like, what do you know about finance or something like that? And the way we particularly do things. So there's a big gap, I think, often in believability and credibility when you're trying, especially working with new stakeholders, or when you're coming from a part of the organization that maybe isn't as trusted to be a good partner. And often you have no control over those things. That's, again, going back to corporate politics. It just is what it is, and you're trying to do the best you can.
So you raise a number of good issues, and in terms of this latter, and in terms of interpreting, but also having the stakeholder relationships. And when you talk about credibility, and when you talk about credibility that we need as BAs from our stakeholders, and we don't have the credibility sometimes. So if we're going into a finance group and we're not an accountant and we don't have our designations for accountants, whatever that might be, or finance, or so it's difficult. We will not get instant credibility from those stakeholders. And it's clearly not our fault. I mean, that's the project we've been assigned to work with these stakeholders. We don't understand their world and their terminology and their lingo, but they also don't understand ours. But for some reason, I found that BAs, we are looked at as not having credibility. So credibility is an earned state, right? So we might not have it initially, but over time, when we show the consistency in, for example, learning what their terms are, in delivering what we say we're going to do what we say we're going to do, in terms of documenting accurately, in terms of doing our job well and being reliable and consistent, then we have believability, at least on that front. And we earn credibility as a BA, maybe not as a finance expert, but at least as a BA. And then we can move on to trust and true collaboration. But it's a very difficult spot, I think, that BAs are put in, because we know our craft, we know what to do, we know what our processes are, but we are going into all of these kind of foreign environments where we don't know the subject matter, and we are trying to get credibility. And unfortunately, we can't get instant credibility from these other areas. So we need to kind of start at the bottom of the ladder and start with consistency. Do we show up in a consistent way? Do we start the meeting on time? Do we facilitate the meeting? Do we end the meeting on time? Do we say what we're going to do and we follow up and with the notes and they're accurate? And so over time, we get that consistency and over time, we get that believability. But sometimes it really does take a lot of time, especially when we're going into these esoteric environments that are so protective of their knowledge and it's very specific to what they do. So, but thank you for your comment about that because that's a really important issue and it's a big challenge that we face as BAs. Anybody else who have experience with the trust ladder and what was that like with your stakeholders?
I think it's really exciting when you get to the trust and the collaboration parts of the ladder because you built that consistency, believability, and credibility. And it's just really nice when somebody could speak up in a meeting and say they're confused. It's a compliment. And I really have felt I've been a BA for about 4 years in my organization, and we started with no maturity in the area and then also acceptance standards processes. And it was very difficult. Once I got my IIBA certification in ECBA, that actually helped as far as, giving me some more, I guess, things to stand on as far as credibility. But I also think developing those relationships with the stakeholders and showing them, that I do care about them. I want to hear what they have to say. I will do what I say. And I try to practice not being one of those people who lie, you know, um, but I'm pretty sure there's some white lies in there. But it's just been really exciting to get to that point. But I do agree, like everybody has said, when you develop new relationships, because we have a lot of new people that come into our organization, you have to start over. And it's a little bit tedious, because you have to go through that and you're like, why don't you trust me? And of course, they just met you. But I really do agree with this whole diagram. It works.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Oh, that's awesome that you had that experience and that you were taken through the ladder and you got to
Yeah.
that point where there's true collaboration. It's a great
Yeah.
feeling.
Yes, I like it.
Do you have some suggestions? Sometimes we're in short-term projects, so you don't really play the long game of relationships. Is there kind of a quick and dirty way to build that trust, even if you're not going to be working with people for a long period of time?
So that's a situation that I am in all the time as a consultant. And I've worked for over 100, I don't know, 150 organizations, something like that. It seems like I'm on the run all the time, but I'm not. And it's something that I need to do instantly. It's something I need to do in the first meeting. And part of that is just talking about where you've been. So if it's a new CRM project, it's stating right away, I've worked on 10 CRM projects, so I'm very happy to be part of this team and working on this one. And forcing that credibility through evidence and through objective evidence. I've been a BA for 20 years. I've worked on a number of different projects that are very similar to this one. My background in education is ABC. And so you clear a lot of the questions out of the way right away. I think that's really important in an introductory script. And also just knowing what their objections are to working with you. So, for example, I knew that when I worked with a group of salespeople, they don't like to take time away from their daily job because they get commissioned for that. So it's really taking money out of their mouth, right? When they're forced to work on IT projects where they don't earn commission. And so I knew what their objection was for me. and against me is really, it wasn't personal. It was just really I was taking time away from them earning commissions. And so in my introductory script with them, because I need to say things very quickly, I need results very quickly as a consultant. I said something along the lines of, I am going to do all the heavy lifting on this project. I'm going to do all the work. I'm going to do all the process maps, all the requirements. The only thing I need from you is your expertise. I only need you to talk. That's it. And it was true what I said, because I'm the one holding the pen and creating the process maps and everything. And I also said because salespeople like to laugh, right? They're very social. They like to laugh. So I also threw in a few jokes. I also said that, my name is Pam, but it's also heavy lifter because I'm going to do all the heavy lifting for you. And they liked that. They liked that they really didn't have to do anything except what they normally do, which is talk. And of course, I was able to get them to talk very easily. I was able to get them to review documents online, together in a group, which is more talking, and be able to get things like that done. But if you can, number one, talk about your background, how it relates to this project, and number two, find out their objections to working with you or just being on this project, and address those right away and clear that out of the way. I think those are two very quick things that you can do when you're working with a new group. And you can find those objections in a lot of places, right? You can ask the project manager, you can ask the sponsor, you can ask other team members. You can even just think about what their job is. Like sales, I knew that they weren't going to earn commissions by spending time with me. So I knew that that was going to be an objection. You can also ask them yourself. You can, I mean, not in such a bold way as I've been saying it, but there's a lot of different places where you can get objections and pain points from them for working with you, and you can address it and just clear it out of the way and put that to rest. Does that make sense?
That was
Yes,
perfect.
yeah, that does. I would say be careful not to make promises. That's been my experience anyway.
Sure. And can you tell me more about that?
Um, one manager I was working with, was sort of Pollyanna and like, oh yeah, absolutely, I'm going to support you in doing this, and we're going to be just fine, and all these things are going to happen. And after a while, you knew that he wanted them to be fine, but they weren't going to be, and so I lost that trust.
Ah, so it actually affected you and you lost the trust.
Right, but I'm saying that could happen the other way around. If you make promises that you can't deliver on, then you're going to lose trust. So be
A
careful with
hundred
that, I would
percent.
say.
100%, because now you lack credibility, because now you lack believability. You're going down the ladder now, right? Yeah. So, any other comments around the trust ladder and how we can use it to gauge where we are and where we need to go? Okay. So, I finished a 2-year contract with a company called McDougall Energy, and it's Canada's largest privately owned oil and gas company. And we have monthly meetings in this organization among the management, and they included me as part of these meetings. And the president, Darren McDougall, always said in his monthly meetings, he said the following: I will always be honest with you. Sometimes I might not be able to tell you everything, and I will say that, but I will always be honest with you. Having the president say this and seeing the president do this was transformative and trickled down, I think, to the rest of the senior leadership team and to middle management and down to somebody like me who was kind of at the bottom of the ladder in a way as a consultant. And I never got the impression that any of the senior leadership deceived us in any way at any time. And they really do have an incredible team at at this company. They've been one of Canada's best managed companies for over 10 years, I think. So it was really having that. He had believability, he had credibility, he had the whole trust ladder, actually. And it was amazing to see. Like, I hope that some MBA class goes in and studies this company because they're going to find that they adhere to the trust ladder and have been getting amazing results. And number of, the way that people work for this company and deliver results is truly astounding. And like I said, I've spent my years in over 100 different organizations. But the trust ladder is so powerful. So collaboration without trust is just a polite performance, really. And collaboration with trust is very transformational. Has anybody worked in an environment where they could feel this true collaboration and trust, or even on a team? Nobody.
Sorry, I shared earlier, so still Michelle. Yeah, so I have had that with different departments that I've worked in. So I worked in a lot of different areas. But yeah, it's where we all knew that we could count on one another. We worked with each other over probably like 10 years. And so we knew what to expect, we knew expertise, and we never, had or rarely had any issues with that because, we knew what to expect. And then we performed and collaborated really well with one another. Mhm.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a great
Yeah.
feeling. So, in conclusion, collaboration is an outcome, and consistency is the path to influence. And honesty is not just telling the truth, but also not hiding the truth. And it's within our best interest to look for different cues of deception. And again, not to say that people are deceptive or people are not nice or they're nefarious, but for whatever reason, if it's environment imposed or another reason that they are not feeling safe, not to be deceptive, it is something for us to look at and at least to start to observe and have an intention of being collaborative. It would be great to connect with any of you if you'd like on LinkedIn. And that's all that I have for tonight. I'm happy to stay on and
Thank
discuss this
you.
topic. I'm very, very passionate and excited about it.
Yeah, this is Trish. I just wanted to say one thing. I appreciate your presentation, and I have probably the same
Okay,
perspective,
couldn't get off mute.
but I've really never thought about what you said, which makes sense about people lie a lot at work. When you said that, it kind of hit me like, no, they don't. No, unless they're really bad people, but you definitely opened my eyes in different areas and how it might be considered a lie or withholding the truth. It totally made sense. So I appreciate that perspective that you gave.
Thank you. And I appreciate all of your comments for tonight. I learn as much from you guys as I hope that you might learn from me. And all the stories that you don't hear except from personal experience is what makes a presentation for me worth going to. So thank you for all of that.
I like the little limerick that you created about adding context before the question. It changes the game because it changes the frame.
Well, thank you. It was I was a conduit from somewhere else for that.
And I was just going to say, it probably says more about some of the places I've worked, but I was like, of course people lie. People lie all the time in a business context, mostly for, again, probably where I've worked, political reasons and survivability reasons. It's a requirement for a whole lot of business places if you want to keep a job. So it's an unfortunate truth. At least, again, in my experience, this probably says a lot about the places I've worked, though. So
Well, David, I think I agree with you because I found that when I worked in finance, that there was a lot more lying going on than when I worked in the health, in a health organization where, people, it's about people's survivability and health and depends on accuracy and all that kind of thing. Of course, you would think that finance does as well, but for some reason, I just found that in finance, I just came across a lot more deception.
and to me, I think it's usually been more in the sort of the project office context, where you're working in a much more, as you said initially, temporary type situation. It's a more sort of business transactional. But in the situations like where I was embedded in a specific business unit or supporting a specific application, and in the context within we were doing BA work, was much more stabilized with a consistent group of people. As you said, we all built up that trust in the need to lie from a business perspective, to do the polite fiction type thing fell away a lot more when it was a more stable environment with a stable group of people. But when you're in a more inconsistent environment with an inconsistent group of people and you're going from one project to another and you're working with, say, 3 different project managers and 4 different business teams and all that, and you really don't get that long-term engagement where you do build up that level of trust, that you're far more likely to get that situation where people feel they need to lie or just not be fully truthful because, again, you never really build up that level of trust, and you're never really sure of what your safety margin is for expressing an opinion or having, for anyone to express their opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, well said, David. What is the safety margin for being able to express your opinion?
Hey, I really appreciate your closing comments. Collaboration is without trust is a polite performance, and collaboration with trust is transformative. And I think that's very true. I think that when people are not trustworthy and they're just performing, it brings down the morale, and it also it the work environment doesn't work. It's not as smooth. People are not motivated. They feel less engaged. They don't want to engage when they can't trust.
I think that's just so true. And I'm glad that you brought up about motivation, because how can you be motivated when there isn't true collaboration and trust? Like, what are you motivated by, right? Like
Hmm.
to be your best self and go over the top. Like, there's nothing that feels good about working that way in an environment where there's no collaboration and trust.
Yeah, I worked on a project for the first half of the year. It went very well. And then it changed project managers, and the new project manager, there just wasn't any collaboration and nothing got done. And so he wasn't, the person wasn't very trustworthy. And so nothing, it just didn't go well.
Did they keep how did the project end? Did they keep that project manager?
No, he ended up having to leave.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not surprised to hear that.
Mhm.
And I think also if there's no trust, there's no, how do I say this? There's less desire to collaborate because you feel that an attempt to collaborate is less likely to achieve results. So if you don't trust that, your feedback is going to be heard and acted upon, then, why would you collaborate at all? As you were talking about, like with salespeople, hey, if you're going to make my job harder and make me lose money, because you're imposing something new on me, or you're not hearing my feedback and on the way to do something or concerns I have, and you're just going to make my life harder. I have no reason to collaborate with you because there's no trust that you're going to actually make my life better. You're going to only make my life harder.
Yeah, there's
Yeah, being
trust at
upfront.
so many levels, isn't there? There's like, can I trust you that you're going to give me credit for the work that I did, for you. Like I can't. So what am I working hard for you for? Right? Like it's human nature that you want to be supported and protected and people honest with you. And it is a real motivator when you have the opportunity to work for such an incredible manager like that, which I'm lucky that I have had over the years and been able to see the difference. But I've also had some really bad ones too, probably undiagnosed sociopaths, and including, I don't mind saying this, one person who had on his resume that he had correctional services experience in communications, but he neglected to say that it was actually on the inside. Um, so that person yeah, he would have been a psychiatrist dream for sure. The way that he was able to manipulate and leave information out about where he got that communications experience and so forth. But he eventually had a dismal end as well because the team came together and just actually refused to work for him, because there was no trust and no collaboration. And he destroyed that in a very short amount of time.
Sometimes with those personalities, the damage that they do, you don't realize it until like a year later.
Yeah, after they're gone.
Awesome, Pamela. I have to, give you an applaud and thank you for bringing this engaging topic, like the discussion that's been happening tonight. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's always
Yeah.
a pleasure to come back. I think it's my third or fourth or fifth time. I'm not sure, but it's always a pleasure.
Yeah,
It's
at least
fantastic.
four.
Yeah, we appreciate you and your